welcome to episode 5 of Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobbie Holmes. I've gotten some really good story suggestions from my listeners, and I can't wait to share them with you. I was actually planning on doing a listener episode this week, but I was scrolling through serial killer documentaries, like I always do when I'm bored, and I came across The Confession Killer on Netflix. I'm shocked to say I'm not familiar with this case. So I shifted gears, and today I'm going to tell you about Henry Lee Lucas. I'll be playing some clips from the documentary throughout this episode. This week's episode is packed full of surprises, less about the gory murder details and more about conspiracy, corrupt law enforcement, and even a girl coming back from the dead. Sounds crazy, right? Stay with me till the end and it'll all make sense. Let's get a little backstory. Henry Lee Lucas was born in 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. Both of his parents were extremely abusive. PSA to all you parents, can we all just try to be decent human beings? I mean, try your hardest not to abuse your children, please. You are messing them up for life and raising potential serial killers. His father was a raging alcoholic and his mother was a prostitute. She brought men to their house and had sex with them in front of the children. Sometimes she even forced them to watch. When they went out in public, his mother made him dress in women's clothes, and she did this because she would actually pimp him out to her clients, both women and men. Like, what a disgusting woman. How could you do that to your child? Outside of this emotional and sexual abuse, his mother also physically abused him. When he was just 6 years old, his mother hit him over the head with a 2x4. He was unconscious for a long period of time and ended up in the hospital for his injuries. Flash forward to when Lucas is imprisoned for his crimes. This was around the time where the FBI and law enforcement were working on serial killer profiling, like I had talked about in the Ed Kemper episode. So I am going to just let them tell you a little more about what a profile for a serial killer sounds like.
And in that profile, there were distinctive characteristics. The person usually hadn't married and didn't have children. There was usually a controlling parent. There was a history of the child visiting emergency rooms repeatedly. And then psychological issues like suicidal tendencies, cruelty to animals.
To try to figure out what these killers had in common, a brain scan was done on Lucas. It showed damage to the frontal and temporal lobes, more than likely from the trauma of his mother's beatings.
The doctor said it looked like a head trauma that happened between the ages of 5 and 10. They found some temporal lobe damage, some frontal lobe damage. The combination is supposed to be the worst that it can be. Temporal lobe means no control over impulse. Frontal lobe is lack of compassion, empathy. You put those together, it looks to me like you have a serial killer.
In 1949, his father comes home super drunk and doesn't quite make it to the door. He collapsed outside and passed out. Now, this was December in a blizzard. This must have been quite the drunken stupor because he never woke up. He actually died of hypothermia. Shortly after, in the 6th grade, Lucas drops out of school and takes off. He becomes a self-described drifter. In 1954, he was convicted of a string of burglaries near Richmond, Virginia, for which he was sentenced 4 years in prison. While he was in prison, Lucas had a pen pal. Once he was released, the pen pal became his fiancée. His mother disapproved of this fiancé, and one day when he was visiting his mother, they got into a heated argument about how she wanted him to move back and help take care of her. As if this woman deserves to be taken care of. Nope. His mother hit him over the head with a broomstick. Henry swipes back with a knife he had on him and leaves her lying on the floor to bleed out. His sister Opal returns and finds their mother lying in a pool of blood. She calls 911, but it was too late. Another reason not to abuse your children. When they do become serial killers, you are likely going to be one of the victims. He claimed that he killed her in self-defense, which that did not hold up in court. He was sentenced to between 20 and 40 years in prison. which is kind of a big difference, 20 to 40 years. He only served 10 years and was let go due to overcrowding in the prison. So crazy. Don't they just move inmates around to other prisons if that happens? But no, he lucked out and was released 10 years early. In 1971, he had another run-in with the law. He attempted to kidnap 3 schoolgirls, and he ended up serving 5 years for that crime. Once released, he became very close friends with a man named Otis Toole. Lucas moved to Jacksonville, Florida to live with Toole and his parents. Toole had a 15-year-old niece named Becky. She was quite the little delinquent herself and had escaped from a juvenile detention center. The two convinced Becky to go on the run with them. They settled in California. They ended up finding someone who needed help taking care of their 82-year-old mother, Kate Rich, who lived in Texas. So the 3 of them drove back to Texas, and they ended up living with Kate in her home and became her caretakers. They were eventually kicked out because they suck at life. They failed to do their job or make the payments on Kate's bills. So shortly following this, Kate was reported missing. Local police looked everywhere for her, but no luck. According to Lucas, Becky got homesick for Florida, and they were at a truck stop, and he just saw her getting in the 18-wheeler and taking off. After that, she was never seen again. She too was listed as a missing person in the state of Texas. A family member of Kate Rich told police that Lucas had been living with her for a while, and they knew that Lucas was Becky's boyfriend, which is gross because Becky was like 15 and Lucas was in his mid-40s at this point. That's just wrong. He was the one thing that these 2 cases had in common, and he became the prime suspect. In 1983, Lucas was arrested for possessing a gun without a permit. While in custody, he confessed to killing both Becky and Kate Rich. He was a talker, just like Ed Kemper. He said he stabbed Kate in the chest with a knife. Afterwards, he drug her body down to a ditch and had sex with her. Remember, this poor woman is 82 years old. Then he took her body back to his apartment and burned her in an outdoor stove. He took police to the site where he said he raped her. There were pieces of her clothing and her broken glasses were left behind. He then took them to where they could find Becky's body. He said to dig in a certain spot and there would be a pillowcase with most of her body. Then he pointed one way and said her legs will be that way, and he pointed another way and said her head will be that way. They were able to find all of her remains. Lucas reports that he and Becky were having an argument and he stabbed her to death.
The judge asked him, "Do you understand that you're being charged with murder?"
I'm sitting there in open court, casually listening, and all of a sudden, Lucas just blurts out, "Well, Judge, what are we going to do about these other 100 women I killed?"
The media went nuts. There had been serial killers before, the most victims at the time probably being Ted Bundy with at least 30, but every newspaper published a front-page story about the man who is claiming to have killed 100 women. There was a special task force put together. Typically, police work within their jurisdiction, and they don't know what's going on outside of that, and that's why when a person kills in multiple locations, it's not always recognized and put together that it's the same person committing these murders. So now, because of these claims, police across the country are working together to try to find all of Henry Lee Lucas's victims. Lucas was cooperative with the investigation, and he was meeting regularly with law enforcement for interviews. Each time, he was provided with whatever he wanted to make him comfortable. They wanted to maintain his trust. They treated him like a friend they were working with. He walked around without handcuffs, in civilian clothing. He was always provided coffee and cigarettes, but he even had steak dinners, milkshakes, TV privileges. I mean, who wouldn't want to keep that going? The Texas Rangers praised him. They said he was doing them a great service by helping them close these cases. They treated him like a member of the task force. They gave him a pen and paper and asked him to write down anything he remembered. He began sketching each victim, and around the picture that he drew in like the empty space on the page, he would write details about what they looked like and how he killed them, what he did with their bodies.
All I have to do, if I've ever killed a person, is they can show me a live photograph of that person. And I can look at the picture and I can tell you if I've killed it. And if I've killed it, I tell you how and where.
It. Killed it. Now that does sound like a serial killer right there. No empathy. That isn't even a human being to him. She's just an object.
I don't know whether it's me or whether I look trusted or what. I don't know. But they get in the car. I go up and knock on people's doors, tell them I'm hungry, tell them I want a drink of water. They invite me right in their house. I say, come on in. Yeah, come on. Which is the worst mistake they make.
One Texas Ranger said if people could stand the smell of him, they would just let him in the car. Apparently he smelled awful. I'm a dental hygienist by day. I can tell you why this dude smells. It's coming from his rotten mouth. He has like 3 teeth in the front, and in the documentary, they keep zooming in to show a close-up of his smile, and he's got pretty severe periodontal disease. And that's the nastiest smell, like you know when it hits you. It's gross. He was able to physically take police to some of the bodies for identification, which made him seem more credible for being responsible for the hundreds of claimed murders. But police were sharing the files with Lucas, like he was able to see information that only the perpetrator would know. They began showing him the files and the photos. He was feeding them false confessions. I'm pretty sure it's partly just to keep the special treatment coming, or maybe it was partly to do with notoriety, like he wanted, if you're already going down for multiple murders, you might as well make yourself famous for being the biggest known serial killer in existence. He exaggerated his confessions. He said he killed every way possible except for poison. His 100 claims turned into 300, and then 600 women murdered. And the Texas Rangers apparently didn't find this suspicious. One case that he confessed to was a Jane Doe. They referred to her only as Orange Socks because her body was found on Halloween, naked. The only piece of clothing was a pair of orange socks. There was a paper trail that proved that Lucas was over 1,100 miles away just the night before Orange Socks was supposedly killed. And this raised some eyebrows, but still the Texas Rangers kept moving with the Lucas task force. Outside law enforcement and journalists that interviewed Lucas were starting to see holes in Lucas's confessions. When alone with Waco journalist Hugh Ainsworth, Lucas told him that he didn't kill those people. He made it all up. He knew that Lucas was not responsible for the murder of Orange Socks. But Lucas continued to go along with the Orange Socks confession. This case was going to get him on death row. He said he wanted to die, but if he committed suicide, then he wouldn't go to heaven where Becky was. Sorry to tell you this, Henry, but I think heaven's gates will probably slam in your face. He said if he was convicted of Orange Socks, the state would kill him, and he would be able to see Becky again. Otis Toole was brought into the interview room. When he and Lucas got together, they were giggling like schoolgirls telling these stories. Whatever Lucas said, Toole just went along with. If Toole was asked a question first, he would just say, well, what did Henry say? They said Toole was not the smartest of people. He told stories of helping Henry with the murders and barbecuing the bodies. Later, when interviewed alone, Lucas was asked why Toole said these things, and he said Toole was just jealous of the attention that he was getting, and he just made all that stuff up. As trial for Orange Socks approached, Lucas got scared. He decided the night before not to testify. He was found guilty, and his sentence was the death penalty. He left the courthouse smiling. He got what he wanted. The term he used was legal suicide. The task force continues. They actually allowed him to leave Georgetown prison and was flown around the country to help aid in closing his supposed murder victim cases. Lucas agreed to go along and help if he was provided with a TV in his cell wherever he was staying, which of course was provided to him. He was frequently stopped for autographs. I never understood why people react that way. I'm admittedly obsessed with this stuff, but not in a way that if I saw the killer, I would want his autograph. I'm obsessed in a way that if I saw him, I would be like, "You're a monster," in his face. Lucas confessed to the murder of Deborah Lemons. Deborah's parents were relieved to finally find out who took their young daughter from them. When they were called in to speak to the local police and they played Lucas's confession for them, they knew instantly he was lying. He was shown a picture of the house when he was confessing to this murder, and he said he went in through the sliding glass door and he went down the hall to her bedroom where he stabbed her, and then he left out the back door. The Lemons said that the sliding glass door in their house was actually blocked by a large piece of cabinetry, and there's no way that he would have been able to enter that way. He had obviously never been inside their house, and how he described executing the murder just didn't add up. The Lemons went to authorities with their concerns that Lucas was not their guy. The task force wasn't hearing any of it. As far as they were concerned, the case was closed. They were not satisfied with that result and did their own investigating. The Lemons found out that Lucas was living with his half-sister in Maryland at the time Deborah was killed in Texas. They put more effort into finding the truth than the actual police. When the paper trail was brought to light, more and more things came up discrediting many of Lucas's confessions. Work records, bank records, dental appointments, parking tickets, and other citations. They were stamping when and where Lucas was, and he wasn't where he said he was, murdering these people. He apparently left quite the paper trail. He wasn't the drifter he portrayed himself to be. Why wasn't this done initially by the Texas Rangers? I mean, is this not investigating 101 kind of stuff?
They have Lucas driving to commit a murder in Spokane, Washington on October 2nd, driving more than 2,000 miles for an attempted abduction on October 4th, driven 600 miles to kill in Saline County, Arkansas on October 7th, traveled 950 miles to kill in New Mexico on October 16th, then traveling 1,000 miles to kill in Nevada on October 27th, and driving 1,600 miles to kill in Bossier City, Louisiana on October 29th, and another 2,100 miles away to kill 2 days later. Then back another 2,000 miles to kill 2 days after that.
It just was not possible. I mean, if they were traveling by cruise missile, they couldn't have gotten there that many places that quick.
You should see the visual of this map while this is being described in the documentary. There's like zigzags going back and forth across the country in just a matter of days. I think his shitty old car probably would have fallen apart. Remember Hugh Ainsworth, the journalist that Lucas had admitted that his confessions were false? Well, his house was broken into. Nothing actually of value was taken, but guess what was? The Henry Lucas interview tapes. He thought it seemed suspicious and he didn't know who to trust at this time, so he did not report it to the police. There were no reports in the media or the newspapers about the break-ins. The next time he saw Sheriff Jim Boutwell, the sheriff said, "I'm sorry to hear about you being burglarized." That is when he knew the Texas Rangers were trying to hide something. Vic Pizzelle was the DA of Waco, Texas. He was presented with 3 of Lucas's confessions in his jurisdiction. When reviewing these cases, he knew something wasn't right. One of the cases was already closed. They had found the murderer. He has read many confessions before, and something about Henry Lucas's written confession just seemed off. Pizzelle tried looking into Henry Lucas. He logged into the National Crime Records. That's what would show where and when Lucas had been as far as citations, parking tickets, that kind of thing. Well, when he tried to log in, his computer, which is so old, by the way, it looks like the first computer ever made, it just started blinking, access denied. A DA was being denied access to information, which is very out of the ordinary. I mean, that information should be available to all law enforcement. Linda Irwin was leader of the Dallas Homicide Squad. She met with Lucas to talk to him about the cases he confessed to in Dallas. He talked for hours. She knew he was lying through his 3 teeth. Nothing he said matched any unsolved cases they had. So the homicide squad decided to make a bogus murder file and present it to Lucas and see what happened. It had fake victims, fake photos, fake forensic reports. The Texas Rangers in Georgetown were unaware of this bogus file, which Linda didn't really feel the greatest about going behind their back, but they needed to get to the truth here. Linda met with Lucas again. When she showed him the file, he told her details about how he broke into the homes, how he killed the women, and what he did with their bodies. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Shit is about to hit the fan. Vic Pizzelle was working with Hugh Ainsworth to find out the truth. Ainsworth wrote an article that was on the front page of every newspaper. It exposed Lucas as a fraud. It said he lied about all the murder confessions, and this article did not shine a good light on the Texas Rangers, and they were pissed. Vic Pizzelle was working with Hugh Ainsworth to find out the truth. The Rangers allowed Ainsworth to work with them interviewing Lucas, and now here he was accusing them of sloppy police work. Henry Lucas was taken to Waco, Texas. Without the Rangers by his side, he admitted that he had made it all up. It was all a lie.
I have never took anybody to locations. They have took me to locations. I don't drive the car, and I don't tell them which way to go.
With the news article and the recanted confessions from Lucas, the DA, Vic Pizzelle, had it out for the Rangers. He felt he had to, quote, violate the law enforcement brotherhood, end quote. He couldn't let Lucas go down for crimes he didn't commit while the real murderer is still out there running free. The Texas Rangers stated they would not be reopening any of the Lucas cases. They said that Ainsworth completely fabricated his article and there was no evidence to his claims. Well, except that we do know for a fact he lied to Linda Irwin about the cases in Dallas. A war starts between the Texas Rangers and Waco DA Vic Pizzelle. Pizzelle said he noticed suspicious people driving by his house, tapping his phone calls, and someone even killed their family dog. He was receiving death threats. Someone would call his house at night and say, "We have a bullet with your name on it." In September 1986, the FBI surrounded Pizzelle and arrested him. The charges were for mail fraud, accepting bribes, and racketeering. Channel 8 must have been in on it because they were right there with cameras rolling as he was being cuffed. When he walked by, he gave the camera a thumbs up, a double thumbs up actually, and he said he was going to prove what he knew was true. Pizzelle had opened a grand jury investigation for the murders Lucas confessed to in Waco. He believed this arrest was retaliation. If indicted, he would spend 80 years in prison. The people who spoke against him in court, the ones he supposedly took bribes from, they gave their testimonies in exchange for tax debt relief. They only had handwritten notes as to when these bribes took place as their proof. There was no formal documentation showing any exchange of money. Pizzelle was found not guilty. He wanted to sue the FBI and the Texas Rangers, but apparently you can't do that. They have government protection, which is insane. They shouldn't be untouchable. The only thing he could do was sue reporter Charles Duncan and Channel 8 News for libel. In court, there were no documents or any real evidence. The only thing presented were the tapes from Channel 8. Pizzelle won that civil suit and was awarded $58 million. He immediately stepped down from his position as DA and said he had no interest in politics any longer. By June of 1985, the Lucas Task Force was up to 217 closed cases and 11 convictions, one of which was Orange Socks, and that landed him on death row. There was no evidence in that case that Lucas was the killer. The only thing linking him was his confession. What this all came down to was that Sheriff Jim Boutwell wanted the notoriety of closing these cases. He didn't care who went down for it, as long as they were marked as solved and people see he was the one who caught the bad guy. Henry had mental problems. He was a sick man who was being manipulated by the sheriff. This is like the original Making a Murderer. I'm going to play a clip, and this audio is pretty rough, but you can hear how they are guiding him to the answers they want from him.
Where did you pick up that couple? This is Shreveport, Louisiana. Shreveport, Louisiana. The couple we're looking at weren't picked up in Louisiana. They were picked up in this area. I realize possibly you might be somewhat confused over things. But you look again and Laura's picture.
In 1993, Georgetown Sheriff Jim Boutwell passes away. Vic Pizzelle had stepped down from DA, but he was still practicing law. He actually became the defense attorney for Henry Lucas.
In the 90s, after I won the verdict against Channel 8, I became Henry's defense lawyer. In spite of there being no physical evidence, no witnesses, nothing to tie Henry to these crimes except what came out of his own mouth, which was fed to him that he just regurgitated back out. Henry will probably be put to death for something he didn't do.
Then something happened that was going to help Pizzelle and Lucas's case. Out of nowhere, Becky Powell comes forward. Yep, that's right. She's back from the dead.
Well, I was shocked to find out I was dead.
Becky Powell, his girlfriend, who he supposedly killed. And here she was, back from the dead.
He did not cut me up and throw my body parts everywhere.
There were letters found where Becky had written to Lucas while he was in prison. Lucas now says he didn't kill her. He saw her get into the 18-wheeler at a truck stop and left. Becky said she left because she was tired of being broke and hungry. She didn't believe he murdered any of those people. Police thoroughly interviewed her to confirm she was indeed Becky Powell. She talked about her Uncle Otis and other family members. She even knew the address of her home in Jacksonville, Florida. Becky told police that she was trick-or-treating with Lucas the night that Orange Sox was killed and he couldn't have done it. She was 15. That seems a little old to be trick-or-treating, but Lucas was in his 40s, like way too old for trick-or-treating. I would not give him candy. The only thing not adding up here was that Lucas led them to Becky's body. If that wasn't her, then whose remains did they find? Pizzelle wanted to believe that this was true because it was helpful for his defense. But like a good investigator, he wasn't just going to take someone's word for it. He met to speak with Becky one more time. While they were talking, his wife snuck upstairs and did some digging through her things. Are you ready for the next twist? In her suitcase, Pizzelle's wife found a stack of letters from Lucas. This woman is one of those crazies who is obsessed with serial killers. I mean, not like me, like in a bad way. At first, she started writing to Lucas and eventually came in to visit him in person. They hatched a plan for her to pretend to be Becky to help get the cases he was convicted of dropped. The letters gave details about Becky, her home life, her family, only things that Becky would know. She confessed that Lucas coached her on what to say. She said she was in love with him and wanted to help get him out of prison. This lady was a murder groupie. He was not the first killer she fell for. She also visited John Wayne Gacy and Charles Manson in prison. Throughout Lucas's stay in prison, he was periodically given a psychiatric evaluation. One of the things he was tested for was confabulation. And I'm just going to let the expert explain what that means.
Confabulation is a type of memory impairment. In other words, a person has gaps in the memory, and those gaps are automatically filled in with invented information. In this test, he was off the scale. Henry would take facts, and then he would add fantasy, and then he would add what he thought the person he was addressing needed or wanted, and that would create a new truth. And that truth would shift from moment to moment.
Henry Lucas has gone back and forth so many times with his confessions, it's hard to know what to believe. At this point in time, he is saying the only person he has ever killed was his mother, which he already served his time for. Well, half of his time. He was 1 week away from his execution date, and Governor George W. Bush made an announcement that if there is any doubt in a case, he cannot allow the person to be sentenced to death. He felt like this case showed doubt. He canceled the execution, and Lucas was to serve life in prison. He died of natural causes in 2001. Guys, this story was bonkers. Did he only kill his mother? Did he kill the 11 he was convicted of, or the hundreds he confessed to? I honestly don't know. I think he killed his mother for sure, and probably Becky and Kate. It seemed like he knew about those murder details all on his own, and after that is when the sheriff started feeding him case file information. It's so sad that there are people out there who got away with murder, and these cases are probably still unsolved because the sheriff wanted to make a name for himself. What a selfish person. You care more about your reputation than the justice of these victims and their families. So I think I want to start doing a discussion after each episode on my Facebook page. Just make sure that you're following me on Facebook and Instagram at Killer Stories Podcast. I really look forward to talking with you guys about this case. And keep sending me story suggestions. I would love to hear from my international listeners. I see you, Germany. Email me, killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, this has been a killer story.